Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar entitled Leading the Diverse Multi-Generational Workforce, Lessons from the U.S. Military. This webinar is being brought to you by Lowe's. My name is James Campbell, and I'm the Senior Manager of Industry Relations with NAA. I want to welcome all our members in attendance. Thank you for joining us for this important topic. Before we get started, I want to go over a few housekeeping points. First, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted to our website and YouTube channel next week. You may then share this webinar with those colleagues and friends who are unable to attend at present. Next, we have allotted time at the end of today's presentation for live questions and answers. You may type your questions into the Q&A or chat boxes on your screen at any time, and then we will share them with our presenter. Now, I'm very pleased to introduce our host, John Sons. John is Director of Training and Marketing Strategies for Burlington Capital Properties, where he has worked for over 20 years. Previously, he held property management positions at Colonial Properties Trust and Walden Residential. John is CALP certified and serves on the faculty of NAA Education Institute. He is also chair of the Diversity and Inclusion Subcommittee on Education at NAA, as well as chair of the Operations Subcommittee on Mental Health. John?
Well, thank you, James. I am super excited to introduce a mentor of mine, a motivator of mine, and a colleague of mine, our featured speaker, Command Sergeant Major retired Patrick Alston. Patrick is employed as a senior fellow for the National Defense University's Capstone and Keystone programs. He's also a senior consultant with Burlington Capital Corporation, an investment management firm, Owen Industries, a leading steel processor, and Flatter Incorporated, a federal government service contractor. Patrick's a native of Columbus, Georgia, and attends Trident University. His distinguished military career concluded with leadership roles in several U.S. defense agencies, including as Chemical Corps Regimental Command Sergeant Major for the U.S. Department of Defense, as Command Senior Enlisted Leader for the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, and as Command Senior Enlisted Leader for U.S. STRATCOM. Patrick has received numerous awards and decorations, including the Defense Superior Service Medal, the Legion of Merit, the Defense Meritorious Service Medal, the Meritorious Service Medal, the Army Commendation Medal, and the Army Achievement Medal. He's also received the Chemical Corps' highest award, the Order of the Dragon, as well as the Transportation Corps' Honorable Order of St. Christopher. Again, I'm super excited to introduce my friend, Patrick Alston. Pat?
Hey, John, thank you so much for that introduction. I will tell you that it's definitely a distinct honor and privilege to address what I consider to be one of the most important entities in our nation today. You know, as I was talking to several people, I was explaining that, you know, what you all provide for 36% of our nation's population is one of the hierarchy of needs. You know, we have 333,664,866 Americans today as of 9 November. And about 36% of that number are renters. They are ones that are leaning on you for that hierarchy of need. And I am so honored to be able to address individuals that's providing that for our young American sons and daughters who are living the life dream because of what you all are doing each and every day. Also, it is such an incredible time of the year. Today, we celebrate the Marine Corps' 246th birthday. A Corps that has led in the trenches day in and day out to allow freedom to reign in this country. And then of course, tomorrow we celebrate Veterans Day. We take a pause on that 11th day of that 11th hour, that 11th month, to allow us to show honor to Americans that have donned our nation's cloth and have stood in the gap to allow democracy to reign in this great country of ours. And so as you can see, this is such an enlightening day for me where I can celebrate the Marine Corps and I can celebrate veterans and I can honor each and every one of you all for what you do and allowing Americans to have somewhere to lay their head and to feel value added as great citizens because you are standing in the gap to allow them to do that. Well, let me take a few moments today and talk about something that our nation has really been facing tremendously in the last 12 to 18 months. And that's the social unrest of our nation. And that's talking about diversity. And are we leading in that diversity realm the right way? Well, today I want to take a few moments and talk to you about diversity and inclusion and how that can allow your organization to be one of the best organizations ever if you look at these two entities and partner them together and allow everyone to be a value added, to feel value added. It will take your organization to the next level. Next slide, please. You know, as we
Here in America, we will have a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. Regardless of whether you're male or female, it doesn't matter if you're gay or straight, it doesn't matter if you are black or white or Asian or Indian or any other ethnic group. It doesn't matter what your country of origin is or the spelling of your last name. It does not matter if you are Catholic or Protestant, Muslim or Jew, and it doesn't matter if you don't believe at all. It does not matter if you're rich or poor or common or famous. In this country, in these United States, under those colors of red, white, and blue, in this country, all Americans are created free and equal, and we will rise or fall based on our merit, and we'll be judged by the content of our character, not the color of our skin. That is the core organizing principle of the United States of America, and that is why we fight.
And that is why we fight. And I hope what you took from that quick video was the fact that our armed forces is made up of every possible type of individual that walk these hollow grounds of ours. And these individuals understand that it's not about the individual to their right or left, color, creed, gender, but it's about what that individual brings to the organization for the overall success of our armed forces. Just imagine for a moment, if we all had the mindset that everybody's value would be measured on them and not the color of their skin, would be measured on them and not the religious beliefs they have, would be measured on them and not who they're dating, would be measured on them and not where they came from. Just imagine for a moment, if you would, that every individual would have the opportunity to enjoy this American dream. Every individual would have the opportunity to be able to be who they want to be able to have what they want to have, would be able to be measured by who they are and not by who we think they are. Well, that leads into this word called diversity. You know, as I started to grab Webster to dig into this word to truly understand what it meant, it told me that this word really classifies an individual's abilities to come together to help the overarching effectiveness and efficiency of an organization. Diversity did not tell me that I must measure an individual, look at an individual by anything else but their abilities. I would ask you to look at diversity as the abilities for someone to do something. You know, sometimes we get stuck on diversity and we only see it as one entity, and that's race. But I will tell you that diversity is not built on race, color, creed, or gender, but it's built on the background in which you have. It's built on the geographical location in which you was brought up. Diversity can be a tremendous barrier if we allow it to be, but a tremendous enhancer if we understand it. Next slide, please. Well, this takes me to the 9 dimensions of diversity. You know, sometimes we tend not to look at the other 8. We are so fixated on race. When we hear that word diversity, we always tie it to a thing called social unrest. But I would ask you to take social unrest and put it back in your hip pocket, and I would ask you to only look at diversity as the 9 dimensions in which it intend to be looked at, inclusive of all 9, that is. I would ask you to understand that race is only one part. Ethnicity is another part. Gender is an important part. Sexual orientation, that's a part. Social economical status. Do we look down on people because they don't have the means in which we think they should have? Do we look down on people because we do not measure them for their abilities, but measure them for what their cost is? Do we measure age as a discrepancy? Or do we measure age as maturity? Yes, age is one of these dimensions that sometimes we measure a person's ability only by their youth, and forgetting that those that are older are mature and ready to lead from the front. Do we look at physical abilities and determine whether we want them on our team or not? Do we measure religious beliefs as being the cornerstone for the know-all and catch-all? Do we look at political beliefs and say, if you're not in my party, then you don't matter? I would ask you to look at these 9 dimensions of diversity and put them in the right perspective in which they need to be in. And that's a perspective of just a characteristic, but not the measuring substance of an individual. But the one that I would beg you to really hem in on, the 10th one that is not listed, but the one to me that defines the gap that's been determined without us even noticing it, and that's generational differences. I would ask you to understand that generational differences is that 10th dimension of diversity that we don't talk about, nor do we measure. And that generation differences is what's causing our nation, in my humble opinion, to decline each and every day. Because that lack of the ability to communicate across all generations is causing a gap or a seam that we're having a hard time getting by. If we stop for a moment, even in your industry, if we stop for a moment and look, we will clearly understand that the baby boomers are our senior most leadership. You know, those individuals that born between 1946 and 1964. Those individuals that we look at as the most senior presidents or the most senior executive leadership of an organization. Do we understand them? Do we understand what their core makeup is? Have we stopped to really look at that individual and figure out why they tick the way they tick and why they have a disconnect from their ability to translate and communicate all the way down to Generation Z? I would tell you that that generation is a generation that was raised by a village. And so that generation had tremendous relationship skills. It was a generation that was resourceful. It was a generation that could fix and find anything, anytime. It was a generation that had a mental focus. A generation that clearly was disciplined. Now I ask you to look at those attributes, characteristics, and then let's translate them as we get down to Generation Z. Well, here's a generation that now has to transpose their communication to Generation X. They have to now talk to a generation that is a little different than them. A generation that was born in 1965 to 1976. A generation that I will tell you that was called the latchkey kids. A generation that clearly stayed at home by themselves. A generation that was more directive. A generation that slowly lost the ability to have those relationship skills. But a generation that worked extra hard to overcome the deficit in which they were created by being a latchkey kid. A generation that could not accept negative input or negative evaluations. Let's compare where we're going here. We're going from a baby boomer generation that was a generation that was raised by a village to a generation that's locked key and left home alone. Come on now, somebody. A generation that could not have the ability to translate because they didn't understand why you don't understand me or hear me. And then we move down to the generation called Generation Y. A generation that says, do not call me a millennial by peer terms, but understands me as a millennial by the technology that rolled out during my tenure. There's a generation that was born between 77 and 1995. A generation that understood what it was to have selfies and text each other. A generation that didn't want to answer the phone, but a generation that used the same device to text you back. Think about the communication gap that this dimension has created with generational differences, if you will. It was a generation that also was a push-the-button generation, a now generation, a Nestle quick mix generation. Add the chocolate in the white, spring it together, and you got chocolate milk. That's the generation that Generation Y is like. It's a generation that thinks it all should be done now. So I ask you to do a comparison. How do you see going from a baby boomer, most senior leadership, to senior leadership, that X generation, to now having to translate down to the Y generation? And we haven't even got to Generation Z, that 1960, 1996 and after generation. That's a generation that 95% of them have some type of smart device. That's a generation that's very inquisitive generation. That's a generation that would rather be connected by technical means than by human resources or human communication or human touch. That's a generation that says, I will understand you, believe you, and trust you only if my news feed will solidify what you're telling me. It's a generation that simply says, I want to verify. But it's a generation that has an 8-second attention span. Now, what I'm saying to you is nothing negative about the generations, but what I am showing you is that diversity also is developed by the differences as we grew up in the era in which we grew up in. This generation, the Generation Z, could go down as the greatest generation in the history of our nation, because this is the same generation that raised their right hand and said those 79 words that they will stand in the gap and allow freedom to reign in this country. So it's not a lazy generation. It's just a different generation. But if we don't lock in these generational differences, especially when it comes to the communication platform, we have established gaps and seams that will deteriorate the fiber of our nation. I would ask you to stop and think, how are you communicating throughout your workforce? How are you allowing the generational differences to not stop the productiveness of your organization? How are you looking at them and maximizing what they bring and allowing your generation to move forward? Are you meeting them on their ground? Or are you trying to be that baby boomer or that Generation X or that Generation Y and force your beliefs on this new generation? Are you calling them when you should be texting them? Are you showing them when you should be answering to them? Are you pushing back when you don't want them to be inquisitive, but if you stop and listen to the input that they have, it may change the rudder of the boat in which you're piloting? I would ask you sometime to measure the generations for what they bring. Different is diversity. But how do you maximize that different is where we're going next. Next slide, please. So as we talk about inclusion, as we talk about a set of behaviors that we just talked about, the culture behaviors that transpose from one generation to the next generation, not only the 9 dimensions that are listed in every document you read, but this 10th dimension that shows that they have a culture difference. So how do we encourage those employees to feel value added? How do we look at what they bring, those unique qualities they bring? How do we measure that to allow them to be value added? Or do we shun them and not be inclusive? See, diversity, D&I, was really written so that we could take all people and make them all feel value added by having them all be inclusive and by fostering a sense of belonging to all. But I would tell you from Alston's perspective, if you don't understand the clientele that you're leading, you can't be inclusive. If you don't stop and take a need to understand them and their thoughts and the way that they move and the way that they operate and the way that they think, it's hard to be inclusive. Even if you're talking about the basic 9, if you don't stop to look at the basic 9, not even counting the 10th one, it's hard to have a healthy experience and foster a sense of belonging. And really, inclusive is about maximizing the value of everyone. You know, as General Milley just clearly stated, we don't care about how you spell your name. We don't care about the color of your skin. We don't care about the religious belief you have. But what we do care about is the value that you bring to us once we begin to learn and understand the values in which you have. Shared values maximize great output and production. Next slide, please. So as we're talking about some methods of inclusion, I would ask you to understand that these 4 methods cannot be maximized if you do not know your clientele. If you ever took an opportunity to sit there and talk to that Generation Z about why they love to text or why they have an 8-second attention span or why they believe everything that come across TikTok or any other social media means, if you don't have that conversation, how do you build a culture of inclusiveness? How do you build a culture? How do you build a culture of value? How do you build a culture where everybody feels like their input is valued? I would tell you that input from an individual is not always input that you would execute on, but it's the fact that you allow them to have that input now increases their value in their mind to the organization. See, everybody's not looking for you to execute off of the input you receive, but they are expecting you to allow them to have the input so they could be valued. And that takes me to employees' value. How are you exercising different methods to make your employees feel valued? Are you giving them issues and concerns and stepping back and letting them figure out the capstone? Or are you only trying to guide them? Employee valued is circled around one word: trust. And so I would ask you to exercise trust in all that you do when it comes to being inclusive. Exercise trust, belief, and you will have ultimate value from your employees. Healthy experiences. Give them experiences that they can leverage at a later time. Give them experiences that they can share to help you create that culture that you want in your organization. Give them experiences that they will sell your focus, your vision, your intent at any given time. I would ask you to always have them have a sense of belonging. There's nothing worse than being in an organization you feel like you're not belonging. You feel like you're in the wrong place. You feel like everybody's talking around you and not with you. You feel like everybody's moving around you and not including you. There's nothing worse than a sense of not belonging. As you exercise these four, exercise trust. Make it your base platform for execution. You know, as I don this uniform of our nation for some 36 plus years, I will tell you that it didn't matter what level I was at. It didn't matter what service member I was dealing with. It didn't matter what conversation we was having. I could look in their eyes and I could see if they trust me, then everything was going to be all right. And you got to understand, the business that I was in, it was a life or death situation. You know, as we embarked on the grounds of Afghanistan, Iraq, and 130 other different countries, it was about being your brother's keeper. It was about making them feel inclusive. It was about making them feel valued. It was about making them have healthy experiences, about making them have a sense of belonging, because it was about bringing them home to their loved ones. And so if these measures was executed, it was that much easier for me to say, welcome home, welcome home. Because they made that tenure that much easier, because I instilled trust in them, and in turn, they gave belief in me. Next slide. So as we talk diversity and inclusion, I like to always flip it around. I like to say you must have an inclusive, diverse setting in order to be successful. And let me go into a little bit more why I say that. I truly believe that in the armed forces of today, we're one of the most diversified institutions in the free world. You saw it on a quick video that there are all kinds of people that make this great armed forces. But what our job is to make all feel value added. It's to make all feel a part. It's to make all feel just as important as the next person. And we do that by having a collaboration that par none. Where all could sit and talk, where all could express, where all could really leverage their experiences and share them until we all became better individuals. See, diversity is a cornerstone of success in my mind. The more different people you have, the more ability there is to learn. You can learn from people simply by the experiences they had and the experiences you did not have. It is so value added to learn from somebody else's walk and to allow you to be that much better of a person because you learned from their walk. It is unbelievable. But I would tell you that at the end of the day, you must listen and not just hear. If you want to have an inclusive environment, you must listen and not just hear. Because those that just hear are not those that build the culture in which we just spoke about. Because they're only hearing just to hear. But those that are listening are the ones that are carving that culture to be inclusive. Those that are listening are the ones that are making those employees feel value added. Those that are listening are the ones that are having that healthy experience. Those that are listening are the ones that have the sense of belonging for all and not just for themselves. I would ask you to be a listener and not just a hearer. Inclusive diversity can and should be the cornerstone of success for your organization. Collaboration is a must, but collaborating with somebody that only look, act, feel, do like you, you're not learning. Next slide, please. So let's take it a step further when we talk about diversity and inclusion. See, the traditional definition of diversity sometimes limit us to gender and race, because we feel if we have a platoon, I would use military language, of all males, then that is not a diverse platoon, or a platoon of all females. That's not a diverse platoon. But what I'm here to tell you is that diversity is not measured by how individuals look. It must be measured by the experiences and the baseline that individuals have. You can have all 5 white males in a room, and that can be a diverse room, because one can be from Georgia, and one can be from New York, and one can be from California, and one can be from Asia, and one can be from Hawaii, and they all grew up different. Their baselines are different, and I will guarantee you their communication methods are different. We must understand that diversity has a place for different cultures, as well as a place for different races and gender. And what drew me to understanding the diversity in generations. This is what kind of brought me to the understanding that all generations are diverse. They are all different. They grew up at a different time in our nation's history. They had different means. They had different things provided to them. They had different accesses. And so they're all diverse. And that drew them to think different ways. As you go back out to your organizations, have that conversation. Have that conversation with your most senior leaderships, down to the managers of your apartment buildings, down to the maintenance people. Have that conversation. From your oldest to your youngest, have that conversation and see how different their expectations are, how different their anticipations are, how different their outlooks are, how different their communications are. And then I would ask you to derive to a place where you allow all to share their experiences and means to make your organization better. Where you're not measuring the old guy and say, well, he's technically past his time. Or you're not looking at the young guy and say, he just don't understand because he hasn't been around long enough. Or you look at the mid-grade people and say, they just will not change. Let's go a step farther and let's make sure that we're using diversity as an inclusive culture to get after making our organization better. Because at the end of the day, it's all about how do you make your organization the best of the best? How do you take what you have and allow them to make your organization stand high above all other organizations? How do you take the characteristics that's put before you and melt them together to get to the ultimate accomplishment of whatever organization you're running? Next slide, please. So we look at, why do diversity and inclusion matter? I know sometimes we are just overwhelmed with D&I, especially in the last 18 months with social unrest and George Floyd, and all we talked about was D&I, D&I, D&I. But why do it matter? Why do it matter to our employees? Why do it matter to our companies? Why do it matter to our mentors and our mentees? Why do it matter? Well, Alston will tell you that it matters because employee engagement, to me, there's no better way of learning, mentoring, coaching, and teaching and training than one to another. See, a strong, diverse, and inclusive program will instill a passion in all to have a conversation, a passion in all never to drop the mic, but to understand our brothers' ways and our sisters' ways and our brothers' dominion and our sisters' dominion, to understand one another. Because understanding one another gives us a clear, precise look into who we are. You know, I take you back to when I was in basic training in 1981, and as I walked into the barracks of Fort Dix, New Jersey, and my drill sergeant looked at me and said, "Alston, Jones is your bunkmate." And I looked at Jones, 6'6", skinny, red-haired white kid from the deep mountains of Tennessee. Probably I was the first black guy he ever saw in his entire life. And he looked at me and said, "Spec, what you gonna teach me?" And at that moment I froze and said, what have I got myself into? Well, Drill Sergeant made it very clear to us that the only objective here is for both of you to pass basic training. And I'll never forget Drill Sergeant Sullivan, and he had a draw, and he said, "Listen, boys, let me tell you something. Our nation don't care whether you like each other. Our nation don't care whether you get along. Our nation don't care. But what our nation do care about is freedom reign in this great country of ours. And so I'm going to measure your ability to be a good soldier, Alston, off of Jones' ability to be a good soldier. And Jones, I'm going to measure your ability to be a good soldier off of Alston's ability to be a good soldier. So whatever differences you have, I would highly recommend you put them aside. We're still best friends now, or good friends now. I would say best, we still stay in good communications now. Because we truly understood one thing. At the end of the day, we both wanted to be soldiers. And we didn't measure our ability to be bunkmates by the color of our skin. We engaged with each other. And Drill Sergeant Sullivan taught me one thing right there. He said, employee engagement is the ultimate success of an organization. In his mind, it was the ultimate success of his platoon. We had so much confidence instilled in us from forcing us to get along and to understand and to coexist that Alpha Company was the company of choice for all drill sergeants and trainees alike. Because that mentoring session that we received just paramount, just went across the entire platoon like never before. And as we measured the ability for us all, black, white, green, yellow, to get along, coexist, run 2 miles, do push-ups, do sit-ups, road march, fire weapons, confidence course, together, we became one of the best platoons Alpha Company ever had. That was a mentoring opportunity for Drill Sergeant Sullivan with mentees that didn't even know what mentees meant. Why do diversity and inclusion matter? It matters because it builds a strong foundation of an organization that shows that everyone don't have to look alike, act alike, or be alike, but they all can mesh together for the accomplishment of the ultimate goal. And I would ask you, if you do not have a mentor or mentee culture, quickly build one. Your mentee and mentor culture is not built off of having a mentor that looked like his mentee. I had a conversation with an organization that said, maybe we should just put our blacks with our blacks and our whites because they know each other. No! Mix it. Give people an opportunity to learn from one another, to see different things, to hear different things. I don't want to be with somebody who's just going to tell me what I already know. Build a mentor and mentee culture that allow all to have an opportunity to move upward and maybe outward. Next slide, please. We all should have a strategic vision when it comes to diversity and inclusion. And I'll ask your vision statement. If you do not have one in your organization, jot one down and pass it through your leadership. But I want to ask you that you should leverage diversity to foster an inclusive community to enhance on whatever your key principles are. Leverage everyone. Everyone matters because everyone brings something decisive to the fight. Leverage, foster, and enhance. Leverage, foster, and enhance. Because at the end of the day, if you enhance your key principles, your organization would be a better organization. Next slide, please. So let's talk quickly, because I know I'm running out of time. Let's talk quickly about two types of D&I practices. And they're common sense practices, but somehow we tend to fail to execute them, and we allow them to mess up the culture of a good organization. Next slide, please. When we talk about good practices, I can sum all four of these up in one word. Build trust. Build trust. Treat others like you want to be treated. Have process and procedures in place that all get great opportunities. Make sure you're mentoring, coaching, teaching, and training. Let's not expect someone to know what they don't know. Let's lead with the mindset we're going to give them an opportunity to learn what they should know. And once we get the opportunity, we would then evaluate and we will make an ultimate decision. But good practices for D&I is simply allowing every individual to have the opportunity to progress, regardless of sex, sexual orientation, religion, national orientation, race, disability, or culture. Let's give everybody a fighting chance. Let's give everybody an opportunity, because that's what we all strive for. We strive to be told we can take the mountaintop, and if we fail to take the mountaintop, this is how we can get better to take it tomorrow. Next slide. Bad practices is simply this: quo pro quo. Never give somebody something they don't earn or deserve. Never give somebody something they don't earn or deserve. Never choose your employees because, oh, it's easy for me to work with them, or it's easy for me to lead them, or they're not going to push back. I heard an old Baptist minister say one time, if you're the smartest person in your circle, you probably need to get out the circle. I translate that to say, if you're only leading those that is easy to lead, you probably need to lead somebody else, because you're not learning. You're not being challenged. You're not being charged. You're not being developed. You're not growing, because you're doing the same old repetition over and over and over because it's easy. Don't choose employees by your personal biases. Choose them by their ability to be the best. Lead, lead, lead. If you want to follow, let somebody else be the leader. But be a good follower, and that will transition into you being a great leader also. Today's culture, you're dealing with an inquisitive generation. Be prepared to answer their questions. Be prepared to dialogue with them. And be prepared to learn, and learn more. Bad practice is when you think you know everything, and so you're shunning people. Good practice is where you know that you don't know everything, and you're bringing people into your circle. Next slide. So as I conclude, I want to really thank you guys for this opportunity to share my thoughts with you on diversity and inclusion. I find diversity and inclusion not to be solely on those 9 characteristics, but I find it to be on number 10 more so than anything in this generation. And that's generational differences. From the baby boomers all the way to Generation Z, how do we cover that gap of communication? How do we allow that Generation Z generation to be value added in our minds when we already had the perception that they're not? How do we change that perception, and how do we allow them to come into the fold with the expertise that they bring to us? How do we change our mindsets as senior leaders, mid-grade leaders, to be more inclusive of all? How do we simply value others for who they are? How do we give everybody a fair opportunity? How do we really stop and think? This world is a great world. This country is the greatest country, but it's only that because it's made up of different people. 333,664,866 different people that are bringing different ideas and different thoughts to our society each and every day. How do we not muffle them? How do we value them? How do we not shun them? How do we lift them up? Diversity and inclusion, Webster says, diversity is simple, different. Inclusion is simple, bringing them together. If you haven't read Webster, take a look at that book that was produced in 1908, but not published until about 1929. Take a look at that book that defined words. Get off of Google, get off of Siri, get into hard copy. Really understand, highlight that book. Because if that book didn't define anything else at an all-time high, it defined what it is to have a diverse and inclusive workforce. God bless you. Over to you, John.
Wow, Patrick, you are always just so insightful and so inspirational. And I can't thank you enough for being with us today, especially the day before Veterans Day. I was excited to have you as a presenter today. And as usual, you did not fail. Your comments were so thought-provoking. And I see that we've got a lot of our attendees still with us. And folks, you know, we want to, Patrick wrapped up a couple of minutes early because we knew that his comments and his presentation would be thought-provoking. So does anybody have any thoughts or any questions for Patrick? He's staying with us. So if you have any, go ahead and type them into the chat or the Q&A box. I'm going to be watching that. James is going to help me. But I do have one here, Patrick, a couple real quick. Great presentation. I particularly appreciate you reminding us of the many facets of diversity. Thank you. So that was a comment from one of our attendees. We do have a question here. What are 5 ways employers can attract and retain military veterans? And I thank you for that question. Liz asked that question. We have a lot of veterans in our industry. I'm a veteran. Of course, Patrick's a veteran. So Patrick, what are 5 ways employers can attract and retain military veterans?
Well, number one way I would tell everybody, if you're not familiar with SkillBridge, SkillBridge is an opportunity that the Armed Forces has laid out where they give veterans, as we know, veterans is not defined as retirees. Veterans defined as somebody who donned our nation's cloth for could be as short as a year to 6 month time frame, but the military just wasn't for them, but they honorably departed and now they are considered a veteran. SkillBridge gives our young American sons and daughters an opportunity to go through their chain of command and say, the military is really not for me, but I want to be a productive citizen. They would then be sent over to the education center to sign up for a thing called SkillBridge. And it allows them for their last 6 months in uniform to be able to go out and work with corporate America. Now, the good thing about this in AA is that that is 6 months of free labor. Why? Because they're still receiving their military compensation, and break, they're allowed to work for you and get all of those benefits and compensations while they're learning a skill from you that they hopefully can then matriculate to once they take the uniform off. So my first answer would be find out by your local installation, if there's one next to you, or simply Google it, SkillBridge, and make yourselves available in that process and program. The other thing I would say is good young veterans are hungry to be challenged, Show them that there is challenges within your organization, that there are going to be discipline within your organization, that they're going to be required to focus within your organization, and those are the organizations they want to go to. The third thing I would say is be part of your local installations. If you have a local installation, be part of it, because most veterans are quickly matriculating to what they know. And if your name has resonated throughout that organization in the top 3 or the NCOA or whatever other organization that they have, and people know you and they can resonate with you, those are where veterans are going to go for long-term engagements. And the last thing I would tell you is simply be you. Simply be you. And what I mean by that is let veterans know you are interested. Let them know you want to come to the confines of your organization. And if you would share that with them, they will flock to you because there's trust already being built. Hopefully that gave you 5 tidbits. But SkillBridge is something I hope you all take advantage of.
Now, Patrick, don't all the military installations have, if you will, a transition team that help our military members transition from the armed forces back into civilian life? I know when I lived in Nashville, I'm down in Florida now, but we went up with this association. We went and met with the folks at Fort Campbell. They had a job, I forget what you call it. It was a form of a job fair.
Right.
And they were transitioning the military members. So do the military installations still have those teams that help you transition back into civilian life?
Exactly. We still have the transitional points. We still have the job fairs. SkillBridge just kind of gave it to another level. What John is talking about is you're almost in that 30 to 15 day window. You're almost about to take the uniform off. What SkillBridge has done for us is backed it up 45 days and said, hey, so to give you the rhyme and reason behind this, I don't know if you really understand that the military is on the hook for unemployment compensation for kids that get out. Well, this is a way to get around having to pay that unemployment compensation if you allow them to have value-added employment from the day they take the uniform off. So, John, you're absolutely right. We still have the transition points. We still have the job fairs, but SkillBridge moves it back 45 days to the left and allows them to already get into your organization and allow them to make that ultimate decision once they take the uniform off.
Great. And Liz, that was a great question. She said, thank you. So I still see we have most of our participants on here. Are there any more questions out there? If so, feel free to type those into the chat box. Feel free to type those in to the Q&A box. I appreciate Liz asking that question about the veterans. Patrick's right. The veterans are hungry. Our armed forces, our military members. It is an adaptation process. It's a transitional process to come from active duty. I don't care if it's 2 years, 4 years, 15 years, or 20 years. you have to transition back to civilian life. And as a military member, it's nice to know that there's people out there welcoming you into their workforce. And I think we have a great opportunity in our industry to welcome a lot of those folks on board. Military members are used to structure, right, Pat?
Yeah, you used to structure. Hey, and I would ask you guys to ask any questions you want. I am not limited to only talking about D&I or the military. I mean, let's talk. Let's my favorite saying now. I heard an old Baptist minister say, "Hey, listen, son, if we're ever gonna make a difference, we can't drop the mic, and we can't drop the mic means we got to communicate. So if there's something on your mind that you want to talk about, feel free, put it in the chat, John, and get it to me, and let's dialogue."
While they're thinking about it, Pat, I'm gonna ask one, and I think this may be on folks' mind out there. Continue to think and type your questions into the chat. Pat, what's the best way, and I know you know the answer to this, what's the best way to motivate a team when you need to? When you see a team needs that extra shot in the arm or that extra shot of motivation, what's your best advice on how to do that?
So the means that I used to use when I was in uniform to motivate young American sons and daughters was having a conversation, bringing them into a safe space to really, no joke, have a conversation. What you find today is that, remember I told you earlier that this generation and most of the generation you're dealing with, the generation that operate off of very, very limited attention space. I mean, this Generation Z is 8 seconds. I think Generation Y is 16 seconds or 22 seconds. I mean, these kids are multitaskers that are inundated with so much stuff. But when you slow them down and you have a conversation with them and you really find out what makes them tick, you really find out what's important to them, you really find out what's in that space of execution for them, then you know how to motivate them. That's why I tell everybody, if you don't know your clientele, if you don't take time to understand your clientele, you will have a hard time leading that clientele because all clientele is different. So, John, to answer your question, I would have what we call all hands in the military. I will have them frequently. I will slow down to bring them into a safe space where I would be able to dialogue and talk to them, put the rank on the ground, and no joke, really get into their circle so I could know what mechanisms I needed to really motivate them. This generation is not a generation of a lot of relationship skills. And so it really is upon you to really get them to open up and dialogue with you. But it's all about communication.
And you've mentioned before, the military is dealing with 5 generations in that workforce right now. So yeah. We've got another question here, and this may be our last one, but if you have one, type it in. We've agreed to go over a little bit if we have to. How do you address DEI/employee burnout?
Whoa, that's a very good question. Now, employee burnout should be measured on the ability for you to keep your employees engaged. What I mean by that is, what are you changing? What is the dynamics that you're making fresher within your organization? Or are you doing just the run-of-the-mill A, B, C, D, E, F, G? Or are you changing that and going A, B, C, X, Y, Z? Making it fresh, making it different, making it challenging. Everybody enjoys a challenge because everybody wants to have a reason to get up in the morning. But if you're asking me to turn the same wrench the same way day in, day out, and making it no way exciting for me, then I'll come up to burnout. If you feel your employees are getting burnout, change their battle rhythm. Throw some little surprises in there where you have maintenance guys that do maintenance on this suite of apartments. Change it around, challenge them, make it fun. Make that guy that do HVAC, challenge him to be able to do plumbing. Now I know that it's hard to do that because you want to make sure that you keep those those apartments and those organizations going right. But you got to make it challenging. You got to do some cross-pollination in order to make people feel that there is a reason to get up every morning because there's something different for them to do. D&I is not going to solve employee burnout for you. What's going to solve employee burnout is good leaders coming up with good ingenuity to make employees feel like there is a new challenge for them.
Great answer. Great questions. Well, you know what? We have come up. It's perfect time. I think you had that. You timed that perfect. I don't know if you have a clock in front of you, Patrick. I don't think you do. You normally don't. But that was perfectly at the top of the hour when you answered that last question. So with that, I'm going to thank you again, Patrick. You know, I'm a huge fan of yours. I appreciate everything you do every day for our organization and now for NAA. So thank you for being here today. Thank you for your presentation. I'm going to turn it back over to James.
Well, terrific. Thank you both. Fantastic. Inspirational, energizing, thought-provoking. And there's a lot to chew on here, Patrick. So we really appreciate 36 years of military experience boiled into one 45-minute presentation. So if you'd like more information, more insights from people, Patrick's peer set, we welcome you to come to our website. We have a special portal on diversity and inclusion. There is the URL below. And when you get there, you will see all sorts of resources at your disposal. There's a diversity leadership program that we're leading. We have innovation and diversity inclusion grants. We have scholarship awards. We have diversity inclusion awards. We have more webinars like this, courses, articles, best practice, a whole portfolio of resources to help inform your own efforts in your companies and organizations. So with that, again, I want to thank Patrick. I want to thank John. I want to thank our audience for terrific participation, great questions, and wish you all a terrific afternoon.
Hey, and James, I just want to remind everybody that DLP applications for next year are due December 3rd. I believe that's the correct date. Is that correct? December 3rd is when those applications are due for next year. So if you know of someone, be sure to get those applications in. And as a final thank you before I turn it over to Pat for his, these webinars are only as good as our participants and our attendees. So as much as I thank Patrick for being here today, I thank each and every one of you for being here and participating. And Patrick, I'm gonna let you have the final goodbye.
Hey, all I want to say is thank you guys so much for what you do each and every day for that hierarchy of need. Thank you so much for providing good quality homes for our young American sons and daughters and old American sons and daughters, all Americans. And I would ask you to really give James and Sarah a big hand because they did a lot of heavy lifting and make sure that this came off right. So to both of you, thank you so very much. John, thank you so very much for thinking of me and inviting me to do this. God bless each and every one of you. Please understand what you do is just as value added as any soldier that's sitting in any foxhole in any part of this great world of ours, because you are taking care of the American sons and daughters back here and allow us to have clear conscience, knowing that our loved ones are being looked after, provided for, and loved on by the great association like yours. God bless you all.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.